All right, it's 3 o'clock, so I think we're ready to get started. We have a lot to cover today. So first of all, I wanted to tell you all, thanks for joining us. We know that it's a really busy time of year for you all. But before we get started, just a few quick things to mention. If you have a question, please post that in the Q&A area. We may have questions coming in for us today from both Zoom and also from our visitors watching live via Facebook as we're streaming this. And Jim Snyder, QM's Director of Community Engagements and Events, will be monitoring the Q&A, but not necessarily the chat. So make sure that you put your questions in that Q&A area down below. Feel free to go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat area though. And also I wanted to let you know that this session will be captioned and we will periodically pop that link into the chat area. My name is Christine Voelker and I am the K-12 Program Director for the nonprofit organization Quality Matters, or QM. QM works with schools and districts to help them deliver on their online promise by providing them with quality assurance tools and processes. We also certify online and blended courses through rigorous course review.
Good afternoon, everyone, and my name is Cindy Hamblin. I'm the Director of the Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance, or VLLA. The VLLA is also a not-for-profit organization. Our membership includes a number of innovative virtual programs from all over the United States. Consisting largely of state virtual schools and consortium, our membership serve over a 250,000 online enrollments annually. Our mission is to strengthen online learning through leadership, advocacy, expertise, and professional relationships. So this NSQ project was just a natural for the VLLA to be a part of. Chris and I are very happy to have the chance to share more information about this work and what has been completed to update the national standards for quality online courses, online programs, and online teaching. Chris?
Yes, we are. And today we wanted to share a little about the background and the history of the standards, as well as the process that the community participated in to revise and release these new sets. So you may be familiar with the national standards for quality online courses, programs, and teaching, as they were released by iNACOL, the International Association for Online Learning. These standards were used extensively by schools and districts and organizations looking for guidance on starting up online learning programs and as a bench for quality courses, for quality programs, and also for quality online teaching. And as you can see on your screen, the national standards for quality online courses and teaching were last revised and released in 2011, while the national standards for quality online programs were last released in 2009. While proving to stand the test of time, as is the case with all good products, there's always room for improvement, especially when it comes time when time keeps moving forward and advances are uncovered through research. Changing priorities made it clear to the leaders of iNACOL that while they couldn't deny the importance of these standards for the community, they needed to pass the torch. So enter QM and the VLLA. Both organizations have strong ties to iNACOL and bring different skills to the partnership. iNACOL approached us both not only because of the relationship that we have with one another, but because they know QM's background with standards, revision processes of development and deployment, and they know the VLLA's strength in program leadership and oversight, including course and facilitation components. Through this project, an even greater partnership than we had before has emerged. We knew there was an urgency to getting started based on the last revision dates, so we needed to get to work right away. And our first order of business, once the project was approved by each organization, was to form a leadership team. The leadership team is responsible for developing the vision of each standard set, the national standards for quality online programs, teaching, and courses, and adjusting the structure and composition of the standards throughout the process. The leadership team consists of the project managers, the chairs and co-chairs for each standard set, and a number of experts to help shape the standards revision before the standard work groups begin work on their particular standard sets. So as the work progresses, they provide oversight and decision-making guidance for the work groups. The leadership team reflects a variety of perspectives, and they represent supplemental and full-time online learning, blended learning, as well as public, private, non-governmental organization. All of those perspectives come from them. In addition, some members of the team have worked on the iNACOL revisions, and therefore they're invaluable in bringing that historical perspective. So I want to give a shout out and a special thank you to the members of the leadership team who are in attendance today.
Yes, and it was a great group, Chris. As a first step, the leadership team met to discuss and identify what key features of the standard sets that were important before the work ever began. The leadership team felt each standard set should complement each other. As the teams reviewed and made revision recommendations to each of the sets, the work was reviewed to ensure that the indicators in all three sets were complementary to each other. The learning team felt explanations and examples for each indicator was extremely important, and that was a big part of this update. This is a new feature that was not included in the work started by iNACOL. Of course, the work needed to be supported by research. A literature review for each standard set was prepared and shared with each work group. Chris will share a little bit more about the lit review shortly. The leadership team wanted to see a consistent look and feel, so groups using the standard sets would be familiar with the layout and structure. So when they move from the program standards to teaching and course standards, they'd see a similar look and feel. Having representation from the field of online and blended learning was also extremely important. The review process, which again, Christine will share more details about, required that we involved large numbers of contributors from numbers of organizations out in the field. So that was a major step in just getting that community involved. Making the new standards available for free was also extremely important. The NSQ standards are openly licensed through Creative Commons. So based on these guidelines, what you see are updated standards and indicators that are supported by research, flexible, allowing unique organizations to implement the standards based on their local practices, standards that will be revised and updated on a set schedule, which we think is very important. The updates will continue to be reviewed by research and practitioners in the field of online learning and recommendations made. The revision cycle planned will keep the indicators fresh and current moving forward. And the standards are designed to be used in the development, evaluation, and continuous improvement of online programs, online teaching, and online courses. Next, Chris will take some time explaining that extensive revision process that was used as we updated the standards.
All right, so with the overarching guidelines all set, it was time for the real work to begin. We decided to tackle the programs and teaching standards first, and then revise the course standards in the following year in tandem with the Quality Matters K-12 Rubric revision, which I'll talk more about later. While each standard set is different in terms of content, we followed the same revision process for each one, learning and improving each time we did it. Now you can see on the chart on your screen that we really tried hard to have a widespread representation on each of the contributor groups. The types of organizations they represented ranged from districts, state agencies, and statewide online learning programs, to content and technology providers and institutions of higher education. The contributors I mentioned on the last slide were all assigned to a work group within their standard set. In addition to the work group members and leadership team, we had 2 other groups involved. Before the work even began, one of the things that we did was to send out a survey to the community asking for their feedback on each standard set, which we then compiled and gave to each work group within the standard sets. Additionally, once the revisions were made and we had a first draft, we then pushed that draft out to the community for comment. And those people were our reviewers, and they were also really integral to the revision process. So I mentioned that we sent out a survey open to anyone in the community. Types of questions included items like, is this indicator useful to you? Should it remain in the standard set? Would you recommend any changes? So these are people who have used these standard sets. They're really familiar with them. And in working with them, they've had things to share about what they might do to improve it. And this was a chance for them to do that. And all this feedback was then shared with the revision teams. Okay, so we also commissioned a literature review, which Cindy had mentioned earlier. We did this for each standard set. These can all be downloaded from both the QM and the National Standards for Quality websites, which we'll introduce a little bit later. The findings from the literature review were also passed along to the work groups. And I'd like to thank anybody here who has helped out with those literature reviews, because they were excellent. So each review identified themes and practices worth noting as online learning has evolved. Okay, for each set of standards, we had 2 chairs who facilitated the revision process, and we could not have done this without them. Work groups were created based on the current standards. In some cases, for example, in the program and teaching standard sets, work groups had a grouping of standards to revise. In some cases, they may only had 1, and it just depended on the amount of indicators within that standard. Each work group was headed up by 2 leads, and each work group had an average of about 10 members. An important thing to note is that we found, after doing the program and teaching standards revisions, that the work groups that worked most efficiently were those that were led by both a practitioner and a researcher. So we were mindful in making sure that when the course standard work groups were set up, we made sure to set them up like that as well. Each work group member was responsible to read the literature review and survey feedback which pertained to their standard. Each group was also given a Google Doc on which to record their revisions. Remember that one of our goals was to make sure that these sets were consistent, and one of the ways we did that was to create explanations and examples for each indicator that would serve to provide further guidance. In revising each indicator, members were required to make sure that their proposed revised indicator was measurable, specific, and also valid. The other thing they needed to submit was the rationale for their revision and the research out there to support this revision. Throughout the process, the chairs had meetings with the work group leads to ensure that questions were addressed, and teams would have a chance to confer with one another about changes that could possibly impact other standards. Once we had each work group's revisions, the chairs then took these revisions and placed them into a document, which was then massaged and formulated into a draft. The draft was then provided to our reviewers, who volunteered their time to review the standards. Some of you are on this webinar right now, and they also reviewed the indicators, the explanations, and the examples. Now, this step proved to be a really integral part of the process, as the feedback we received from these reviewers was so super invaluable. They had to complete a pretty extensive survey too, and looking at the standard set both holistically, and then they had to look more closely at each indicator. The reviewers had a big job, and we asked them to look at each indicator and indicate whether or not it was measurable, specific, valid, and also if it had an associated complete explanation, as well as specific and relevant examples. They were also asked to provide additional examples where needed, and we were definitely grateful for their help in this process. So the culmination of all this hard work are the standard sets that you see here. So now that you know how they came to be, it's time to show you what you can expect when using these 3 sets.
Thanks, Chris. And as you can tell from Chris's explanation, the revision process was very extensive. A lot of components working together, a lot of people involved. The first standard set we'll showcase today is the National Standards for Quality Online Teaching. And as Chris said earlier, that had last been updated in 2011. A huge thank you to Allison Powell and Wendy Oliver for co-chairing the revisions for this standard set. They did a great job. The NSQ online teaching revisions include many changes and updates compared to the previous version released by iNACOL. First of all, titles have been assigned to each standard category. The standard categories are now listed as Standard A, Professional Responsibility, or Standard B, Digital Pedagogy, so they're each given a title. The criteria previously listed under each standard was broken into teacher knowledge and understanding or teacher abilities. For the update, the criteria has been reworked and now is presented as measurable indicators, as Chris was talking about in the revision. 3, the indicators under each standard have been labeled, making corresponding indicators easy to identify. So for example, Standard A, Professional Responsibility, the user will now see indicator A1, A2, all the way through A5, showing the association with Standard A. And as previously mentioned, each indicator has an associated explanation and example for further clarification. In short, this new edition of the online teaching standards removed 2 standards, reworked 2 standards, and combined 2 standards with an overall reduction of the number of standards from 11 in the 2011 version to now down to 8. In regards to the indicators identified for each of the 8 standards, 8 new indicators were introduced and several were removed or reworked. In all, the total number of indicators was reduced from 72 down to 52. So now let's take a closer look at those 8 quality online teaching standards. The standards include, first, Standard A, Professional Responsibility, and that standard is supported by 9 indicators. We have Standard B, Digital Pedagogy, with 5 indicators. Standard C, Community Building, which this standard is really focused on building a supportive online community of active learning. It has 5 indicators. Standard D, Learning Engagement, or Learner Engagement, has 7 supporting indicators. Digital Citizenship has 4. Diverse Instruction, which has a focus on personalizing instruction, is supported with 7 indicators. Standard G is Assessment and Measurement with 8. And then our 8th standard, Standard H, is Instructional Design, and it's supported by 6 indicators. Standard H is considered optional, and that's due to the fact that the instructional design responsibilities many times are not under the teaching responsibilities. So just depending on what your organization looks like, those can be incorporated or those may not as far as instructional design. So your first look at a standard indicator explanation example. Here's one that we have on the screen from Standard D, Learner Engagement. The indicator is labeled as D4. The online teacher establishes relationships through timely and encouraging communication using various formats. You can see again as it's clearly labeled with D4 or the fourth indicator. Each indicator is followed by an explanation, and that is really to give more details to that indicator. And then an example is really meant to be what you might see this indicator looking like in practice in the field. This same look, feel, same structure is consistent with each indicator in all three standard sets: teaching, programs, and courses. So now let's take a little break, and I'm going to show you the NSQ website and where you're able to download and have access to these updated standards. The website is www.nsqol for nsqonline.org. So let's take a look at the website. Two things I'm going to show you today. First, the standards. You can find the standard sets in a couple locations on the website. If you scroll down, you'll see all three sets of the new standards almost. And I say that because the online course standards are due to be released October 3rd. So in just about a month, the new online course standards will be released, and that new cover page and link will replace the old iNACOL one. Even though you have to wait till October, Chris is going to give you a great look feel of the online course standards here in just a moment. We also have included for now the previous versions, and it was recommended by our leadership team. Maybe that's going to show the transition, the history from the iNACOL version to the newer version. So in addition to the homepage, you can actually go to the standards page too, and then click on the actual standard set you're wanting. So we'll look at the online teaching. And from this location, there's two options. I'm circling around here, the download feature. Selecting that will immediately download the entire standard set for online teaching. Or we have these accordion menu options. So if I wanted to look at the professional responsibility area, I can open that menu option and immediately see each of the indicators, then each indicator with the explanation and example. So we thought that might be an easy access if you've got the website up and just have a question on one or two of the indicators. But you also can download those. Right now, you can download the online teaching, online program, and as I just mentioned, after October 3rd, online courses. In addition to seeing the standards and having those readily available for free, we have a great resource section. And so I want to just highlight that for a moment. Chris talked about the literature reviews for each of the standard sets. Those are available for you to select and download if you really want to see the research that was shared with the work groups. This document, I think, is especially beneficial to those that are in charge of really transitioning from the iNACOL standards to the new NSQ standards. Chris has done a very detailed job in recording every change made at every standard level indicator. So yes, she's a detailed person and did a great job in really giving that map of what happened from iNACOL to the NSQ standards. So I think that's a very valuable document. So let me go back and show a few other resources. If you are working with staff and want to share a video, Chris and I just last week recorded a 27-minute video about the project, and then a really down and dirty quick one, 6 minutes, for just a highlighted version of the NSQ project. Below that then, if there was a link or a reference made in the standards, we provided the link here to that resource. So again, I hope you'll check out this site and take advantage of downloading those standards. So that was the online teaching standards. Next standards we're going to showcase is the National Standards for Quality Online Program. That was also released in March, and the last time that set was revised was in 2009. So right at 10 years ago with the online program standard revision. I was very fortunate to be one of the chairs for that standard set, along with my great co-chair, Chris Harrington. So we had a chance to work on this project together, along with the many contributors that helped out with that. So let's take a look at the changes or notable changes in the program standards. This edition did not include the rating scale. If you remember, the iNACOL standard set for programs had a rating column next to all of the different criterias. We removed that. The reviewers felt this change would allow for more flexibility in how individual organizations might apply the standards. The revisions removed 2 standards, reworked 2 standards, and combined 2 standards with an overall reduction from 19 program standards down to 14 in this new edition. It also reworked and really removed a lot of duplicated indicators. So we streamlined from 109 down to 72 in this version of the program standards. So 14 standards for the Quality Online Program. So I'm going to try to kind of go through that and just highlight a few of them. You have Standard A, mission statement. Standard B, governance, which is really focusing on clear governance structure, to make sure all the roles and responsibilities are identified for the online program. We have leadership. Standard D is planning. Standard E, organizational staff. This used to be called organizational commitment in the old version. Financial and material resources. Standard G, equity and access. Integrity and accountability, which is really providing or focused on providing regular and timely information about the program's progress. The next 2 standards, curriculum and course design and instruction, included many updates and revisions to their indicators. Standard K is assessment and learner performance, faculty and staff support, learner and parent and guardian support, and then lastly, program evaluation with indicators addressing both internal and external evaluation processes. So there are 14 standards that are supported by 72 indicators. And if you see, this is an example from Standard N, program evaluation. Looks just like the same layout as the example I provided for the online teaching standards. So hopefully you now have a snapshot of the standards for online learning, online teaching, and online programs. And so now I'm going to turn it back over to Chris to talk about courses.
All right, so thanks, Cindy. For those QM members out there, as many of you know, we recently, in the past year, made enhancements to our course review management system. And members will soon not only be able to conduct self and collaborative reviews using the QM K-12 rubric, but soon you'll also be able to select and use the National Standards for Quality Online Teaching as well. All right, so the last standard set we'll highlight is the National Standards for Quality Online Courses, which the last refresh of those was in 2011. The release date of the revised version will be October 3rd, as Cindy explained earlier. Special thanks again go to Allison Powell, but also to Story Walsh for co-chairing this set. All right, so notable changes were made to the course standards as well. The revision added 2 standards with an overall increase of course standards from 5 to 7. 8 new indicators were introduced and 6 were removed because they were either covered in other standard sets like the program or the teaching sets. And remember, we wanted to really really keep them streamlined and focused on their relevant topics. And also they may not have been relevant anymore. And so we took a look at those. All right, so I'm assuming, possibly incorrectly, that many of you participating today are familiar with the iNACOL standards for quality online courses. The iNACOL standards were separated into 5 sections. And those sections were content, instructional design, student assessment, technology, and course evaluation and support. The teams working on the NSQ online courses set recommended 7 standard categories. The standards in the NSQ online courses set are labeled as course overview and support, content, instructional design, learning assessment, accessibility and usability, technology, and course evaluation. The new standards that have been added to the set are course overview and support, and accessibility and usability. These 7 standards are further supported by 45 indicators, and expanding the standards by 2 led to, of course, some significant changes. That's what I'm going to fill you in on today. So the biggest change that you'll notice is a whole standard now dedicated to accessibility and usability. In the last edition of the standards, you can see on the left, accessibility was only addressed in D10 within the technology standard of that last edition. The inclusion of a whole new standard with indicators dedicated to accessibility and usability will definitely help those developing and evaluating courses provide equitable opportunities for all learners. So, yeah. So I wanted to give you a bit more information about how this looks now. So D10 was essentially removed from the technology section and then greatly expanded on. So now you'll notice that within the standard E, accessibility and usability, live the following indicators. E1, online course navigation is logical, consistent, and efficient from the learner's point of view. E2, the online course design facilitates readability, and readability here does not include reading level, which is actually included in the standards as indicator C4, and that lives in the instructional design standard area. Here, it deals with ensuring that the course design elements maximize usability by facilitating readability and minimizing distractions. E3, the online course provides accessible course materials and activities to meet the needs of diverse learners. E4, the online course multimedia facilitate ease of use. And then E5, vendor accessibility statements are provided for all technologies required in the course. The work groups, as well as the reviewers, gave us excellent suggestions and felt strongly that these elements needed to stand alone as independent indicators under this new standard. It's also important for me to note here that even if an online course is designed to meet these indicators, this does not guarantee that particular country, federal, state, or local accessibility regulations are met. It's always best to consult with an accessibility specialist to ensure that all required accessibility regulations are met. Oh, you might like that, Ray. I also wanted to highlight some changes to Section E, course evaluation and support. Out of the 10 items that were originally listed in this area, which included things like instructor and student support, assessing course effectiveness, course updates and certification, only 3 of them now remain. Some of them were moved into the new standard A, course overview and support, and others were removed due to the fact that those items just are covered in either the National Standards for Quality Online Programs or the National Standards for Quality Online Teaching. The remaining standards you'll see had some minor wording changes and further revisions, which you'll be able to see in the explanations and examples once it's released. Okay, so some of the items which were in the course evaluation and support area, as I mentioned, they're now in the course overview and support area. And this is one of the new standards which was added to capture items which maybe didn't seem to fit in the sections in which they were located previously after the work groups provided their recommendations for revisions. Now they just didn't fit. But items we knew that they just couldn't be overlooked. So in this standard, you'll see things like A1, the course includes a syllabus, and information to minimum computer skills and digital literacy skills a learner needs to be successful in a particular course. Instructor's contact and biographical information, learner expectations and policies, where learners can get technical support, and also an orientation. So next I wanted to share a little bit about how the presentation of the standards themselves have been revised from what you may already be familiar with in the iNACOL course standards. First, the sections are now identified as standards. Second, the items in the first row under the label, to what extent does the course meet the criteria in this area, that's now identified as indicators. Reviewer considerations and the rating box have been removed. Instead, you will now see that the standards and indicators are presented as shown on your screen, which is aligned with the other two standard sets. The measurable indicator is labeled as B6 and followed by an explanation and an example. Now, you might notice that the indicator itself in this particular example has an asterisk at the end. The asterisk indicates that this is an indicator that directly correlates to a specific review standard in the QM K-12 rubric, the 5th edition. In some cases, it's the indicator itself, and sometimes this reflects that the text in the explanation and examples come from the QM K-12 rubric's annotations. The exact correlation will be available in that resources section of the NSQ website that Cindy showed earlier, and also on the QM website once the new standards are released. The National Standards for Quality Online Courses works in tandem with the QM K-12 rubric. The QM K-12 rubric has additional annotations which expand on the explanations and examples and provide guidance for reviewing an online course. More information about course reviews, if you're interested, can be found on the Quality Matters website. Okay, so on September 9th, QM will be releasing the 5th edition of the QM K-12 rubric workbook. This workbook will include both the K-12 and the K-12 publisher rubrics. On your screen is a little bit of a sneak peek of that too. We've included elementary annotations to indicate whether the specific review standard applies to a K-12 or a K-12 publisher review. Some of you here today have already taken the rubric update to get a heads up on the revisions. For those of you who may not be familiar with the QM rubric standards for course design, it includes specific review standards as well as detailed annotations which are supported by research and best practices. It was purposeful that we did the revisions for the QM K-12 rubric and the National Standards for Quality Online Courses at the same time. The intent is that they can be used to complement one another, with the QM rubric being used for both reviewing both sets of standards, which brings me to how they're aligned. So some of you here have had your courses officially reviewed by Quality Matters, and you may have opted to generate what we call a derived iNACOL standards report. We developed this so that districts who need to present their course reviews as they pertain to the iNACOL standards would be able to do so after going through a QM review. Essentially, it shows which iNACOL standards were either met, partially met, or not met after having a QM review. Our system on our back end basically uses the alignment that we have between the two standard sets to make the ratings. You'll see that the derived standards report there on your screen shows which QM standards the iNACOL indicator is aligned to, so that a user who's reading the report can then consult the QM final report, where QM certified reviewers gave feedback on those standards and also how they have not been met and what improvements might need to be made to them in order for them to be met. So here's an example of the alignment between the previous version, the iNACOL national standards, and the QM standards. So this particular screenshot shows how many of the QM specific review standards touched on pieces of the iNACOL standards and vice versa. So right now what you're seeing is just the correlation to the iNACOL standard, but we also have it the reverse way. Only about, at the time, maybe almost half of the standards were a one-to-one match. But this screen shows the new alignment between the national standards for quality online course indicators and the QM K-12 specific review standards. So you'll notice now that a significant increase in the number of standards that are a one-to-one match. At most, two standards align to one. In some cases, like the indicator highlighted, this is an exact match. So the indicator matches exactly the QM specific review standard. In others, it might be that the explanation and examples match with the QM annotations. For those of you who have or are planning to have courses reviewed, we will still provide this derived report, but now it will be equivalent to the national standards.
So let's take a look back at the website. We're all very excited for the online courses to be released. And so you'll want to come back again when those are available in October. And we hope you and or your organization will consider becoming a supporter for the NSQ project. And it's very, very easy to either become a supporter or even to send Chris and I a message that you want to be part of that next round or contribute to the next round of revisions. So let me show you how to become a supporter on our website. So if you go to supporters, you'll see already we have a number of individuals supporting the project, or we have a number of organizations with their logos supporting the project. For either one, individual organizations, it just is going to submit a request. From there, if you're an individual, you'll be completing the information about yourself, which is just your first name, last name, email, and country. If you're interested in an organization, it's basically the same, but we also ask for your website and the ability to upload your logo so that it can appear on our page. If you are interested in working with us in the near future, in the next year, will be the next round is redoing the program standards after a year. At least that's the plan, to revisit those. You can select the contact us from the website, fill in your information, and tell us how you'd like to be involved in the future. So I hope you'll consider being a supporter or to contact us. And in addition, we hope you help us spread the word about the NSQ project. We're really trying to get out there and hit the conference areas, make some presentations, but we need your help in sharing the word, sharing it with your colleagues at the local, state, and national level. So hope you'll do that. Chris, I'm going to turn it back to you for some of the things that are coming up to market the standards.
Okay, great. And I think one thing that we neglected to mention, Cindy, is that we are going to be collecting use cases of people who are doing some really great things. There are organizations out there already who Cindy and I have spoken to who have been working with, for example, the National Standards for Quality Online Teaching with their online teachers. And so those things we're going to be collecting and then making available on our website so people can see some of the great things that our teachers in our community are doing with the standards. Okay, so before we leave you today, we did want to mention that Cindy and I will be taking the show on the road. We'll have various sessions on the national standards at upcoming conferences, and we hope that if you're there, you'll join us again. But first, I would be remiss not to mention the QM Connect Conference, which is taking place this year, October 27th through 30th in Grapevine, Texas. So hopefully you'll all come out for that. But we'll also be at iNACOL this year and at DLAC in February. We give out stickers and buttons, so you won't want to miss our session.
Yes, we try to make it fun, don't we, Chris?
We do.
So let's take questions now. Jim, what do you have for us?
Yes, if people want to ask any questions in the Q&A, please type them in. There is a slight delay on the Facebook Live site, so those questions might be starting to come in right about now.
I don't see any questions in the QA yet. Thanks, Randy.
And I did put in the chat, Chris and I both did, a shout out to Butch Gamend. He kind of got this started from the VLLA side and then retired from the organization. So we couldn't have got this going without his work in really getting the VLLA side up and going. So thanks, Butch, if you're on.
Do we have one question from Raymond Rose? Are you interested, willing to present at state conferences?
Yes. So, and if that's not something that either Cindy or myself can make happen, then we do have, we could even possibly come in virtually, or we do have those overviews on the NSQ website that we're happy to let anybody use and share. Just if you want to introduce the standards to your staff, those are definitely things that you can do.
Another question, more of a clarification. For QM course reviews with the new QM standards, we don't need to wait for the October release of the NSQ standards.
Hi, Corinne. No, you don't have to wait for the NSQ because that's something, it's something totally different. So the reviews that we'll do at QM will be based on right now, the 4th edition, and after September 9th, the 5th edition. If you want that derived report that gives you how you fared on your course review in relation to the national standards, then you'll have to wait for and do it on the new rubric. Ooh, I know the questions had to come from the Q&A, but I see a good question from Francis in the chat. So Francis wants to know, can you highlight some of the significant changes in the QM K-12 new rubric? So that's the 5th edition. So some of the new changes actually are that we did a pilot this past year with both Connections and Odysseyware, and we did some reviews using the QM rubric against elementary level courses. And so taking that that information and the data that we received from that, then we went ahead and had a work group who looked at that data and determined whether or not the QM standards as they were could be adapted to elementary courses, and we decided that yes, they could. However, some notes needed to be added. So one of the newest things is that one of the newest things is that we have added elementary annotations to the QM rubric, and so that's in there. We've been, over the past few revisions, making the K-12 and the K-12 publisher rubrics more tightly aligned, and we've done that, I think, an even better job of that this time around. And so thank you to those of you who are on the QM rubric revision committee, some of which were on both the national standards and the QM rubric committee, so that we could kind of, you know, have that cross collaboration as well. So we really tightened that up. Other than that, we kind of folded one of the standards from General Standard 2 into the other alignment standards, kind of like helping to streamline the review process. And so some of those things are the biggest changes there.
You see the question from Sarah from the university. Can you clarify the relationship between iNACOL and Quality Matters?
Sure. So, iNACOL, so they, as you know, they're the International Association for Online Learning. Oh, you missed the first few minutes. That's okay. So, so one of the reasons why we've now partnered with the Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance to refresh these standards is because of their shifting priorities. And so they're kind of moving in another direction. But at the same time, they know how important these standards are. You know, not only they're important to them, but they're also important to our community. And so they didn't want to, they knew they didn't have the capacity with the direction that they were going to keep updating them. And so that's why we've now kind of been handed the torch. And so we've kind of taken over that process from iNACOL. Hope that answered it, Sarah.
She said yes. I do not see any additional questions at this time. I have connected with the Facebook Live people, and they have said there is nothing as well.
Well, look at that, Cindy.
We're finishing early. That's unusual for us. Well, I'll go forward with our closing, kind of to thank everyone for being here today. Chris and I hope you found the information very helpful in learning more about the new national standards for quality online learning. From the detailed revision process that Chris showed and how the community was involved, and how they work together, we really hope that you find these efforts beneficial in a new useful tool for looking at developing of online programs, of evaluation, continuous improvement in all areas of online learning. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact Chris or myself, and you can contact us through the website. Again, consider being a supporter and spreading the word about the NSQ project. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm going to stop the recording and end the meeting.